and welcome to my 400 subscriber celebration live stream. And thank you everyone for 400 subscribers. And you can see the camera setup is a little different, so I've got here the microphone, and the camera is actually set up on a tripod, so the angle is a little different. So you can let me know what you think of this angle maybe compared to earlier angles. So today, as usual in live streams, I'm gonna do a wrap up. So I'm gonna do a wrap up for what I've read in May so far. And then to celebrate, I'm gonna also talk about my favorite authors, but I'm gonna do it by genre. So I'm gonna talk about my father. Congratulations, William. Very proud of my son. Thanks, Dad. So I'm gonna do favorite authors by genre also. So I'm gonna talk about my favorite author having to do with alternate history, economics, global politics. Hey, Williams Library, greetings. Historical fiction, history, horror, and science fiction. And also at the end of this live stream, I'm gonna talk about the future of this channel, as this channel has been going on now for 3 years now. And there are gonna be some relevant changes coming soon, or probably. So let's start with the wrap up. And of course, as always in live streams, this is a Q&A session also. So if you have any questions for me, I will of course answer them. So May wrap up. So this month I've read so far 5 books. I liked 4 of them. One I really didn't like, and I don't have those books with me, as one of those books I borrowed from the library, and the other ones I actually brought back to Sweden when I visited there recently. So let's get into this. So the first book I finished in May was The Plot Against America by Philip Roth, and this was the only book this month. And this was the only book this month that I read that I didn't like at all. So The Plot Against America, it's an alternate history book of Charles Lindbergh becoming president, beating Roosevelt in 1940, and turning the United States into an anti-Semitic fascist state slowly over a period of a couple of years. Now I have many problems with this book. First of all, it's boring. So you follow the life of a little 10-year-old Jewish boy, not the most exciting thing you can write about in alternate history. Also, you have a lot of hyperboles in this book, so you have characters multiple times who say, oh, this fascist is gonna do this and that, but in the end they don't really do anything. Hymns are beautiful. I read the preview and couldn't get past the writing style and stopped reading the reading plot. You made a good choice. I mean, I almost always finish reading the books I read for the channel or just to be proud of me finishing a book. But there are some books that I really hate finishing, that I take a lot of time to read. And The Plot Against America was one of them. It's not a long book. It's what, 300-400 pages. But it took me 3-4 weeks to finish up, and I had to read other things on the side. So that was not an enjoyable read at all. And there's some interesting alternate history kind of towards the end, but it's also bonkers. It doesn't make any sense. It's implausible. So the wife of Lindenberg, after he disappears and the vice president does a coup, she comes in, swoops in, saves democracy. And then of course the final chapter, after the plot has happened in itself, you get the same chapter but just more boring. Hymns are beautiful. I made the library thing and I'm cataloging all my books in my collection. I am now at slightly past 300 books. Hymns are beautiful. Oh yeah. Yeah, I was in Sweden recently and I see I have a lot of books just there. In those 2 bookcases that I have over there, there's probably 150, 200 books. And then I probably have another 100 or so books, I would guess, in Belgium, or maybe 50 or 75. And over here I have, what, 20 books or so? But cataloging books can be a nice thing. You also get to make fun statistics out of the books you read and things like that, or that you got. So The Plot Against America, if you ever wanted to know of one alternate history book you should avoid, in my opinion, that is The Plot Against America. It's not worth reading, in my opinion. Of course, if you're someone who really hates Republicans, then you might like this book, because it's also a caricature of people on the right in this book, kind of. The next book I finished reading was another book by Thomas Sowell. The third book is in his Culture trilogy, Conquest and Cultures. This one I really liked. And this is a book about the history of people who have been conquered and been conquerors themselves. So it talks about the British during Roman times up to now. Or the 90s. It talks about the Slavs, so under the different empires, and then under the Soviet Union, and also how the Soviet Union operated in Central Asia. It also talks about the Western Hemisphere Indians, the different types there, so the Incas, the Mayas, the North American Indians, and the Aztecs. And also it talks about the Africans, so it talks about some different African countries after decolonization, and also the story of colonization. So yes, it's a fascinating read where you learn a lot of history of different places around the world, and also the different cultures and why some groups are poor and why some succeed. So I really like that book. And however, here's an interesting fact. So when I made my book review for that video, I got my first ever copyright claim, because in some of my book review videos, in the non-fiction ones, I use some B-roll footage, some live footage, to make the video more interesting. And usually it's fine, I don't have any problem with it, but this time I got some copyright strike from some French Archives Institute thing. So I had to remove about 1 minute of the original video. So my book review of Conquest and Cultures is slightly shorter than what it was planned to be originally. So I had a section on the Ivory Coast where I talked about President Houphouët-Boigny, but because I used footage of him in black and white, I had to cut out that part of the video, otherwise it would have been copyright claimed and it could not have been presented on YouTube. So yeah. First time I have problem with that. First time my YouTube channel actually has a problem with YouTube, which everyone complains about. But now I finally have come up against this copyright thing. Next book I finished reading is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. So I don't read a lot of dystopia. This is my first dystopia that I've read this year, and it's basically a book where the dystopia in this world is that people don't read books at all. There's no books allowed. Any book that is found is burned, and you may be arrested if you're found with a book. And it's basically a firefighter who realizes this is not good, and he reads a book, it's inspired, and goes off with some other intellectuals to remember books. Williams Library, when I can afford with it, I will buy GB by Lane Dayton. It's another Nazi swing, but it's a classic in art history. Yeah, I don't know about it, but maybe I should check it out. Although I'm getting a little burned out with reading alternate history. I'm gonna get into that later. But there's plenty of interesting Nazi winning World War II scenarios to check out. The next book I finished reading was The Future of Geography by Tim Marshall, a geopolitics book about space politics. And this is actually a new release. It was released in April this year, late April. And I went on YouTube to look it up. I'm the only guy who's actually reviewed this new book, so that's pretty cool. And this talks about space geopolitics, the geography of space, and talks about the competition of the big three powers, so China, the USA, and Russia. And also talks about potential space wars, also gives some history of the space race and astronomy. And I like Tim Marshall as a geopolitics author. He's not my favorite geopolitics author, but he's in second place. And this is the best geopolitics books he's read. And this is the best geopolitics book that he's written so far, as this book talks about space in a very objective sense. Some of the other he veers off and talks. Some of the other books he veers off and starts talking about inequality or other things that I don't really agree with. But this one, Future of Geography, I gave it a 9 out of 10 because I didn't find anything to object to with this book, and it's an informative, interesting read about space geopolitics. And the final book I read this month, and I think that Williams Library is going to be happy with this because there will be a book review of this coming out tomorrow, is Conclave by Robert Harris, which is one of the few fiction books by Robert Harris that is not actually alternate history or historical fiction. This is just regular speculative political fiction. And Conclave is a book about a papal election after a fictional pope has died, and it's a relatively liberal pope, and you see the competition between the liberals and conservatives in the Vatican for who's gonna elect the next pope. There's about 120 cardinals who get to vote for the next pope, and you need a 2/3 majority to become pope, and you get multiple election ballots for this. And you have several competitors, so you have a liberal who seems to be the front runner, but actually not in the first voting, he does badly. Then there's an African priest who people are excited might be the first black pope, but then because he slept with a nun 20 years ago, he loses. Then you have a guy who's also a liberal, a Canadian guy, Quebecer, called Tremblay, but he loses because it turns out he's corrupt. He's tried to bribe his way to the papacy. And then you have a conservative, the guy called Tedesco, who is on the verge of winning, but you have a terrorist attack which influences the cardinals, and he makes some speech about the Battle of Lepanto, which leads to his downfall. And then the main character, Lomelli, who's a calm guy, he seems to be going to win, but actually in the end there's some guy called Benitez who wins. Now, the thing with this book, Conclave, is that 95% of this book, or no, 95, 98%, 99% of this book, what, 95%? Yeah, 95% of this book is perfect. So, if it wouldn't be for the ending, it may be my favorite Robert Harris book, but the ending screws it up. So, it's only the last 10 pages that I really don't like in this book. All else I really love, because it's a fun political thriller about the papacy and cardinals competing with each other, and you see the politics of the Vatican and of the Catholic Church. And this is a spoiler, of course, but it turns out that the person who becomes elected pope is not a biological male. It's some intersex person or someone who was born a woman or something like that originally. Now, I have nothing against trans people or whatever, but the Catholic Church has some ground rules that you only have men as priests. So the fact that they elect someone to the Pope who isn't a biological male, it's just weird. It's not plausible. It's just crazy, and it shocked me when I read that. It was a distressing ending. I did not like. That's the worst. Well, that's one of the worst endings I've ever read in a book. It's also dumb. Like, how you get elected pope, you look like a guy, but then it turns out you're not, and then we're gonna keep it a secret somehow. It's just weird, and in a bad way. So those were the 5 books that I talked about. Those were the 5 books I read in May. My father, but makes book more modern. Oh yeah, Robert Harris mentions that he hinted this throughout the book, because throughout the book there's talk about, oh, we should maybe allow women to become Catholic priests. And if this book had been first having women Catholic priests, and then later they become bishops and then cardinals over time, and then you get a woman pope, that's more plausible if the Catholic Church reforms over time. But just electing someone who isn't a man as pope when every cardinal is a man is just dumb. But yeah, it's in with modern times. And what I just said if my channel was actually popular and some social justice warrior or something saw it, I would be called a transphobe or whatever. So yeah, that's something. It won't have a lot of views, the video that's coming out tomorrow, but we'll see. It's bound to happen eventually that a leftist um, attacks me on social media, so we'll see what happens. But now we've talked about the books I read in May, so the wrap up is done. So now I'm gonna move on to talk about my favorite authors by genre. So I've got seven genres here to talk about. So the first genre is alternate history, and I guess you all guys could guess who's my favorite author for alternate history. It's of course Harry Turtledove. So I've read a lot of alternate history. It's what, 40 books or something like that. And 3/4 of these are Harry Turtledove books. And I also noticed something recently when looking at the alternate history books I've read by Harry Turtledove. It's almost half of them I don't really like. And about 2/3 of the alternate history books that I've read that I don't like are by authors that aren't Harry Turtledove, despite the fact that these authors only represent 1/4 of the alternate history books I've read, and Harry Turtledove, who represents 3/4 of the alternate history books I've read, there's only 1/3 of the alternate history books that I have read that I didn't like that are by him. So by far, Harry Turtledove is the best alternate history author I've read so far because he has such a good track record. So Robert Harris did write one great alternate history novel, but he wrote a mediocre, decent alternate history novel that wasn't as good. And then there are some other alternate history authors that have written good books, but they've only written one each, and they're not all good. There are several alternate history authors who wrote alternate history book that was bad. But Harry Turtledove has written, like, of all the books I've read by him, there are at least 25 books by Harry Turtledove that are good. My father. And Harris, your second favorite or Sprague de Caen? Well, my favorite alternate history book of all time is probably Lest Darkness Fall by L. Sprague de Caen. So if I had to pick a secondary author who would be in second place for my second favorite alternate history author, then it would probably be L. Sprague de Caen. But it's not really comparable since Harry Turtledove is the only author that I've read 3 or more alternate history books by. And there's no alternate history comparable. It's funny because there's a video on YouTube called the Alternate History Iceberg, which lists a bunch of alternate history books, and half of the alternate history books are written by Harry Turtledove. That's not a joke, it's not an exaggeration. So yeah, by far Harry Turtledove is the best alternate history author I've ever read so far. We'll see with S.M. Stirling. I may read some of his books, and he may turn out also to be good, but I've only read one of his books and I didn't like it at all. Moving on to economics. So some may expect that I would say that my favorite economist is Thomas Sowell, and he does write great economics books, but there's one economist who writes amazing economics books, and that is Henry Hazlitt, who's an Austrian economist, columnist guy. So I've only read 2 of his books, but both of his books were amazing, and I'm gonna be recommending those books in a future video you'll see in the coming months. But Henry Hazlitt wrote 2 amazing books. So one is called Economics in One Lesson, which is the perfect introduction to economics, explains a lot of fundamental principles, and also explains the broken window fallacy, that a lot of government stuff is basically they break a window and then they fix it and then they think it creates employment, but that government action actually only removes labor from some other more efficient place. So that's a brilliant short book that actually my former economics teacher lent to me a couple years ago, so I'm glad that he did that because it's the best economics book I've ever read. And then another book I read by Henry Hazlitt, which is much longer, about 400 pages, is The Failure of the New Economics, which is an analysis of the Keynesian fallacies. So I've read, so I'm more towards the Austrian Chicago side of economics, but I've read some other economics books, a couple of books by Keynesians, and I've also read the Communist Manifesto. However, when you read the general theory by Keynes, it feels like gibberish. It doesn't mean anything. And there's a lot of things that he says that are contradictory, and you don't understand why Keynes is wrong, but he uses a bunch of formulas, and he doesn't explain anything well at all, and he uses a bunch of esoteric language. So a lot of people probably read his book and think either, oh, he's right because I can't understand him, I'm not smart enough as him, or a lot of people on the right probably think this is wrong, I don't know why though. But Henry Hazlitt's book, The Failure of the New Economics, explains in depth why he is wrong. Williams Library. I read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I'll make a comparison video of it with Jennifer Government by Max Berry because both are what I call reverse Orwells. Oh yeah, I've read also Brave New World. And wait, Williams Library, you just gave me a good video idea, thanks. I could compare a couple of dystopias maybe. I mean, I really liked 1984, so maybe I could compare that with Brave New World, or maybe I can compare 3 books, so Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World, and 1984, so that could be a possible future video. So, Williams Library, by the way, is great at giving me video ideas from time to time. A few of the videos I've made are inspired by his own videos. But Henry Hazlitt is the book, The Failure of the New Economics, is the perfect critical analysis of Keynesian economics and explains in depth why it's wrong and that it's based on a lot of contradictions. So for example, that savings is the same thing as investments, but saving bad and investments good somehow, and then a bunch of equations that are not well explained. So if you want a good reason why I'm not a Keynesian, you should read The Failure of the New Economics by Henry Hazlitt. And Economics in One Lesson is also, once again, a great introduction, an amazing introduction to economics. So my favorite economics author by far is Henry Hazlitt. And there are a lot of other good economics authors, but a lot of Austrian economists, they write in a way that's hard to understand. So Hayek has written a couple of amazing economics books, but they're also written by someone who thinks in German, and German thinking is complicated. But Henry Hazlitt is a born and bred American, and Americans write in nonfiction in a way that's much easier to understand than the way a lot of Europeans write. So the easiest economics book by far to understand that is legible to laymen is Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, which is a invaluable service to humankind because economics is the foundation to understanding social sciences, in my opinion. So, and he's written the perfect economics books for people to understand stuff, because once you understand economics, you stop believing a lot of the wrong, fallacious stuff that the media or a lot of authors say. And you're less likely to be duped by politicians if you actually understand economics. Next genre is historical fiction. So I've read, I've read historical fiction by Ken Follett and Robert Harris, but my favorite historical fiction author is by far Robert Harris. Now, all of the historical fiction I've read by Robert Harris was either great or amazing. And I've read what now? I think 7 historical fiction books by him. So I really like the Cicero trilogy by him. And I also like his historical fiction stuff where the Germans in World War II, so Munich and V2 were also great. An Officer and a Spy wasn't as good, but it's still a good historical fiction book. And Robert Harris writes in an exciting way, and you feel like you're actually reading history, which you're not really. But you at least have the illusion, and especially with the Cicero trilogy, which talks about the life of Cicero, you feel like you're learning about Roman history, and you get to understand the institutions of Rome by reading Robert Harris. You also learn, you also get some interesting characters among the Germans, Nazis in World War II. So, a great historical fiction author that I really like, and I've read now 11 books by Robert Harris, 10 of them which are fiction. Williams Library. You should read Pompeii. Yeah, yes, Williams Library. Well, there are five historical. I have 5 fiction books left by Robert Harris to read. And does anyone let me ask those who are watching so far? The TBR I gave in December for this year. Does anyone care that I switch it up a bit? Switch it up a bit, because in that video I talked that I would be reading. Said that I would be reading. What was the book about the financial crisis by Robert Harris? But would you prefer instead that I read Pompeii? Because I think that Pompeii may actually be a more interesting read by Robert Harris, since it's about Rome. And Robert Harris writes about Rome in such an interesting way. So yeah. So Robert Harris is a great historical fiction author. Yeah, I should read Pompeii. Maybe I'll read it this year. We'll see. But I think I want to finish. We'll talk about that later in this video. Williams Library. It's your channel. Fine by me. All right, Williams Library. Yeah, I have a thing where when I say something, I kind of feel like I make a pledge, so I feel bad about myself. I feel bad if I say that I'm gonna do something and then I don't do it, but I haven't signed a contract or anything, so I could switch things up on this channel anyway. Then moving on to history. So history by far is the genre where I've read the most books by. So I made a chart recently of all the books I've read in the last 5 years, and about a fifth of the books that I've read are history books. So I've read, I think, about 50 history books in the past few years. And a lot of historians, of course, they don't understand economics, but you still learn a lot of interesting history. But one person who's written history that actually understands economics is Thomas Sowell, of course. So he's the only kind of historian that I can think of that actually writes history books that make sense completely. So I've read 5 history books by him. So the Culture trilogy, so Race and Culture, Migrations and Cultures, Conquest and Cultures, and then I've also read an interesting book about American immigration called Ethnic America, and then a very controversial history book which gives a lot of African American history is Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And by far his history books are the best history books I've read, because it isn't written in this antagonistic, judgy way, which shows this is the bad guy, this is the good guy. No, it just talks about the facts, gives a true history, gives, yeah, these guys did some bad things, they did some good things, these guys did some bad things and some good things. And it's really an objective lens at looking at history. So, for example, the history of slavery in his books is presented as a universal phenomena. So you've had slavery throughout time. And one controversial historical fact is the fact that the European empires in the 19th century used their navies to basically destroy slavery throughout the world. So by far my favorite history books are those by Thomas Sowell, but I've read all of the relevant ones that I want to read so far. So I think I'm done with Thomas Sowell's history for now. Next is horror. The horror section, and I've read a little bit of horror by different authors, but most of the horror stuff I've read is by Stephen King. And Stephen King, of course, is the best horror author I've ever read. Misery and especially The Shining are amazing horror novels. And The Shining is the perfect novel. That's just what I think. there isn't one word I would change for it. I haven't read there's The Shining is the only book that I would consider as a perfect novel. And there's one amazing horror scene there, the woman in the bathtub. And then in other Stephen King books, you have a lot of great horror. So Salem's Lot, Misery, and also in some of his fantasy stuff. Great horror stuff, creepy and with monsters. Same thing with It and The Stand. You have villains there that can actually scare you sometimes. So, yeah, and which makes you uneasy. So the clown in It, which isn't always a clown, makes you uncomfortable because it does some really horrible thing. And Stephen King really takes his time to build up the scene. So he'll talk about the character for 10 pages and then he'll kill him off in a brutal way. Williams Library, have you read Needful Things? I actually haven't. Although since I've been reading some French stuff, when I'm going to go to Canada this summer, I'm not sure. I was originally intended to read History of Feudalism in French, but I may not read that. So I've been thinking of maybe I would read Needful Things when I'm off to Canada this summer, but we'll see. I'm not sure, but I'm definitely interested in reading Needful Things sometime, but I'm not sure when. But no, Williams Library, I haven't read it yet. There are a lot of Stephen King books that I want to read that I own, but I only read, what, 5 Stephen King books a year or so. So I haven't read that yet. I've read, I think, 18 Stephen King books so far. And I'm almost done with the Dark Tower. I just have the 7th book left now, the final volume. But yeah, and Stephen King is overall a great author, great characters. There's no one who writes characters like Stephen King. He builds them up, and and they can be funny or evil or mean. Sometimes it depends, but the characters are great in Stephen King. You read him for the characters. So I don't really like fantasy, but I like Stephen King's fantasy specifically because he has fantasy integrated within the real world, and then he throws in some horror, and it's just great literature. Williams Library, the Elvis Presley stuff in Needful Things is very funny. Oh yeah, there's Stephen King has, like character love. They have some funny things sometimes, and you have some controversial, politically incorrect things that happen in Stephen King books, and they can be pretty funny. Or you have just some really twisted stuff and characters who are just blunt and say, yeah, you're dumb, and you can see the destruction of some bad guys who really deserve it, or some pathetic people sometimes in Stephen King books. So yeah, it's pretty creative and funny sometimes. Like in the most recent Stephen King book I finished up, for example, Dark Tower 6, The Song of Susanna, there's like this bookshop owner who's really addicted to books and loves them too much. Like we think we're addicted to books, but this guy is hunted by the mafia, and he just goes right and left into bookstores into town to buy stuff because he just loves books so much. And he once sold a book for a really good price for tens of thousands of dollars, but he really felt bad about it after it. So it's funny in a crazy way, some of the stuff that Stephen King writes. Yeah. And by the way, Stephen King appears in that book, Song of Susanna, as a character himself in the 80s when he was still an alcoholic who drinks beer. So yeah, it's weird and funny. The final category I'm going to talk about is science fiction. And you can guess who my favorite sci-fi author is. It's Michael Crichton. It's Michael Crichton. Almost all of the sci-fi I've read is by him. I mean, I've read 2 Philip K. Dick novels, and one of them I liked, one I not so much. And Jules Verne, sci-fi, I've read 1 book by him. That was good also, but Michael Crichton, he just writes great upon great upon great science fiction novels. And I've read, what, half a dozen sci-fi novels by him, and they were all great. His historical fiction isn't that good, although it's pretty good. Williams Library, The Terminal Man, I mentioned that in the nerd. Wait a second, you mentioned that. I'm gonna scroll through the comments. You mentioned that in the earlier comments. Let's see. Voyons voir. I can see that you mentioned the Terminal Man, but yeah. Oh, not in the chat. Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of comments recently. The channel has blown up for the comments section at least. So yeah. So I don't remember everything I read. Williams, I mean in an earlier video. Oh yeah. I actually may stop making book reviews by Michael Crichton. We'll see. Because I think that's not really what the content of my channel necessarily should be. Sci-fi, I think, alternate history and historical fiction, and global politics and Thomas Sowell are better, more interesting subjects. And Michael Crichton, it's fast, fun sci-fi. But there is a Michael Crichton video that's coming out on my channel in a few weeks or months. You'll see. You're gonna have a lot of interesting stuff coming out of my channel this summer, you'll see. They won't be book reviews necessarily, but you'll see. We'll talk about it. So yeah, and if half of my favorite books are Michael Crichton novels, if you look at my top 10 list, half of those books in there are Michael Crichton novels. So Sphere is my second favorite book. Just the suspense in the giant squid and people being in the deep blue sea, that's amazing, fun, fast-paced literature. Jurassic Park, an amazing fun novel about dinosaurs, but also some great horror in there, and gets you to think about the horror that you can get from bringing back dinosaurs in real life. Then you have Prey, where you have nanobots who come into real life and start killing robots who are swarms who start killing their creators. Another great, amazing, fast-paced read. You have Disclosure, of course, where you get the gender roles are switched up. So a woman boss sexually harasses her own employee, and then accuses him of sexual harassment. So that's also a fast-paced thriller, although it's not really sci-fi. And then, of course, you have Michael Crichton's controversial but still amazing sci-fi novel State of Fear, about climate change and terrorists and the media doing conspiratorial stuff. And Michael Crichton gets sometimes a bit conspiratorial in his science fiction novel, but it's just so fun to read. I mean, I'm reading The Terminal Man right now, and I can already see I'm almost halfway through. It's gonna be another great sci-fi read for me. It's not in my favorite top half probably, but it's still great. And the sci-fi is explained in an interesting, fun way. The action hasn't really started, of course, in this novel, as the first 100 pages are science fiction exposition written in a fun way, and then the action is in the second half, I guess. But Michael Crichton has a great formula for science fiction books. First 100 pages, you write about the science in a fun and interesting way, and then you get the action throughout the rest of the book in a cool, amazing way, with some mind-bending sci-fi content thrown into the mix. So if you were ever interested in getting into sci-fi and in relatively short books that are not too complicated, but still you feel amazed by reading them and mind blown, you should definitely read Michael Crichton. And Michael Crichton, by the way, is my second favorite author behind Harry Turtlelove. Harry Turtlelove writes a lot of great novels, but consistently, I believe that Michael Crichton is the author that has written the highest percentage of great or amazing novels. Like, no, not now. So, I've read, 11 books by him so far? And 10 of them are 9 or 10s out of 10. And 10 out of 11 Michael Crichton books I've read are 9 or 10s out of 10. Which means that 90% of his books are great or better. So Michael Crichton has a great track record for novels. And I will continue to read his sci-fi. So now I've talked about my favorite authors by genre. So now we're gonna talk about something a bit different during this live stream. So we're gonna talk about the future of this channel. So you've seen that over the past year, I've had a pretty regular uploading schedule. Like every week I've been uploading video, and pretty much every month there's been a global politics book review, an alternate history book review, and either a historical fiction or Thomas Sowell book review. And of course, there's been some listicles or book tags thrown into the mix from time to time. But the thing is, when I read, I like reading alternate history, but I would actually be interested in diversifying my reading habits. My reading habits are so far quite eclectic, but I want to read more widely. So right now I'm reading two books that I won't review on this channel because they're not that relevant to it, but I've got Terminal Man, a sci-fi novel by Michael Crichton here, and then I've got L'Histoire de Charles XII, Roi de Suède by Voltaire, which is a book in French written by French historian and philosopher in the 18th century. Voltaire talks about the history of a Swedish king. And the book reviews on this channel take a lot of work, and usually it's a book review out on this channel each week, and they're weekly videos, and I've been going at it for a year. And there are only some type of books that people actually want to have reviewed on this channel. So historical fiction, Thomas Sowell, alternate history and global politics. But the TBR I made up last year in December, I don't think I will get through it completely because I just have changed my reading taste a bit. And I'm not sure I will read all those 10 alternate history books, especially with the realization that there's a high risk that an alternate history book that I read that isn't by Harry Turtledove, I won't like it. So I'm actually gonna be diversifying my reading tastes more and more. So I wanna read more science fiction. My father, didn't you find Blade Runner great? Yes, I really like Blade Runner, and that's one of the authors I want to read more of, Philip K. Dick. But I don't think I will actually make book reviews of Philip K. Dick books. Although, if I read enough Philip K. Dick books, then I may make a listicles talking about different Philip K. Dick books in one video. So the point I'm coming to with this channel is that I'm still gonna try to have weekly videos out, but they're not gonna be book reviews necessarily. So I would guess that it's gonna be about 50-50 book reviews, 50-50 non-book reviews, but still book related content. So when I'll be off to Canada in June and July, there will be videos out, but there will be other book related content. It won't be book reviews. It will be me talking about my favorite Michael Crichton books, my favorite economics books, reasons why you should read the Atlantis trilogy, my least favorite books overall. And I'm thinking of switching off changing the content up a bit on this channel. So half of the videos you can expect will still be book reviews. So mostly global politics, historical fiction, alternate history, but you won't necessarily have alternate history book reviews each month because I may want to read more sci-fi and historical fiction. Global politics, I expect I will read still each month, but I also want to read a lot more history, and I maybe talk about my favorite history books also on this channel from time to time, although it won't be reviewed. So yeah, the conclusion basically to the future of this channel you will still have weekly videos, but there will be less book reviews and more listicles. And those who are watching now, you can let me know your thoughts. I'm interested in what you think of these changes, potentially. And for people who are watching this live stream after the fact, after it's published, then you can also let me know what you think of these changes in the comments below. And also what kind of book-related content you would be possibly interested in seeing on this channel. Because book reviews are a lot of work, so I want to switch it up a bit, possibly. So yeah. So does anyone have any final comments right now? Because yeah, I've talked about stuff. Williams Library, but if I review alternate history books, I hope you will watch them. Oh yeah, I'll still be reading alternate history books and I'll still be reviewing them. It's just that it will become less frequent, probably. So in the past year, there's been a book review about alternate history pretty much each month. But so from May to April, I had a book review of alternate history each month. But there won't be an alternate history book review in May, and probably not in June. The next one will probably be in July. And I think I may do the thing where I will mix alternate history book reviews more with historical fiction. So I think maybe alternate history will be every 2 months or so, sometimes every month. And then there will be more historical fiction perhaps, because I want to read more Robert Harris. I want to read more Ken Follett. So that would mean that each month you can probably expect one non-fiction book review, one fiction book review, and then possibly a third book review, and then you will have another book related content that's not a book review, but you will have on average probably, but you will on average have 2 to 3 book reviews a month, and then 1 to 3 non-book reviews a month also. So you'll see, I'll mix it up. Cranston Megiddo. Oh, I've never seen you on these live streams. Hi. Have you ever read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations? Yes, I have. I read that last year in February or March, actually. I watch What If Altist on YouTube, and he really likes the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius for some reason, so I decided to check out his book. I actually got it in Prague while I was there a year and a half ago, and I read it last year. I didn't get what's so special about it. It's rather vague and very philosophical. I didn't get much out of reading that book. There's nothing. It's not bad or anything, but it's a book written by a Stoic. And what I got from that book is basically you should be satisfied with your lot and not be angry and stuff. Which, sure, it's a good message, but it wasn't actually that interesting of a non-fiction philosophical read, to be honest. But welcome to the channel. Let's see, you were Cranston Megiddo. But Williams Library, I'll still watch your alternate history book reviews, and when you make books tags, I'll also watch that. Don't worry about that, because I still find those videos interesting. And there are still some alternate history books I want to review on this channel. It's just that it's gonna become more infrequent. So I'm gonna read this summer I'll be reviewing The Days of Infamy, Duology by Harry Turtletaub. There are plenty of more Harry Turtletaub books that I probably want to read and review on this channel. It's just that there won't be that many non-Harry Turtletaub alternate history book reviews, because I know that when I read one, it will one out of 2 will probably not be good. So I won't read that much alternate. I'll be reading less and less alternate history probably throughout the years. It will be decreasing, I'd expect. So yeah. So those were the special announcements, and I'm giving you also my May wrap up and my favorite authors by genre. So does anyone have any final comments or any thoughts? By the way, I'm not sure when the next live stream will be, as summer is approaching, and it's not that practical for me to do live streams in summer. So unless anyone has any final comments, I'm gonna be ending the live stream here. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this live stream. You can expect a book review about Conclave next week, and there will be weekly videos continuing for a while. Williams Library, can I email to discuss a future collab? Yes, you can. You and I should do a future collab, probably a live stream sometime about alternate history or something like that. But yeah, email me and we can set it up sometime in the coming months. We'll see. Okay. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you guys next time, possibly tomorrow in my book review. Thanks for joining me, guys. Goodbye. Avid Reader signing off.